everyone, and welcome to the third week. I can't believe it. This is the midway point of the class, Facing Death, a Christian's Journey to Life Everlasting. And it's just so good to be with you all. As usual, I'm very grateful for each of you being here. I know this is not an easy topic. It's been hard even to plan it. It's brought up a lot of us to plan. Because each of us has a unique story. Some of us may be dealing with a terminal illness right now, or maybe you've recently lost a loved one. Maybe you're a caregiver and you're just tired. Maybe you're considering all these things for the first time. Wherever you are, just know that we see you, we're here from you, and we hope that you take away what you need from this class. And last week we talked about all the choices and decisions we can make today to prepare for the end of life. I hope this past week was a time of reflection, of prayer, and processing all of these things to what God is calling you to steward in your relationships, your spiritual gifts, your immaterial and material possessions, and all of these other, your health and all these other things. When done with God's grace and mercy and in community, this planning and processing that we're doing now, we believe can be a joyful experience by God's grace, right? In the midst of the challenges, these questions may arise. But if you need help or are really stuck on a topic, you're stuck in your journey, this is why we're here. So please talk to your table mentor, talk to me, talk to Father Michael. We're here to help. We have experts here. John Grant is with us, and he is an attorney who is an expert in wills, probates, estates. You're going to be hearing from Dr. Jennifer Lynes, who's a physician at hospice. So we have resources, and we're trying to bring them together to help you because this is a lot. And so this week, Dr. Jennifer Lynes is speaking about demystifying medical management decisions. And it builds upon last week. It's more focused on the decisions you will most likely have to make if you get diagnosed with a chronic illness. So it's more further along in the journey. But it's also a lot of information that can go into the preparation and planning processes that we're encouraging you all to do now. But before her lecture, we're going to begin a devotional by our pastoral curate, Ryan Cecil. Oh, there you are, Ryan. I couldn't see you. And he's going to be offering a reflection on euthanasia and assisted suicide from a Christian ethical perspective. Now, why are we talking about this here? Many people have questions around the differences between these things in, let's say, palliative care and hospice care. And so we want to be clear why the church does not condone euthanasia or assisted suicide, though we deeply sympathize with the pain and suffering those endure who seek such options. We just want you to feel confident that there's a difference between this and hospice and to understand that a bit more fully and why the church supports palliative and hospice care. So Ryan, would you mind coming up and sharing that with us?
Well, good evening, one and all. Sometimes we may have a microphone issue, and sometimes my voice fades a little bit. So if you can't hear me at any time, please raise your hand. I'm looking maybe toward the back there. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I'm getting more excited about death as this class goes on. You know, it's something we're all going to face, and we have to be ready and aware and prepared. And so tonight I'm offering a bit of a difficult devotional reflection, and it's on physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia. And I know that most of us here are not faced with confronting this issue, but in a lot of areas it is a common practice, and it's becoming more common. And so we just have to be aware of these things as we navigate end-of-life decisions. I'd like to begin by a quote by Dietrich Bonhoeffer, which you can see on the screen, and I'll read it. And it reads, "In the sight of God, there is no life that is not valued, that is not worth living. For life itself is valued by God. The beggar Lazarus, a leper, lay by the rich man's gate, and the dogs licked his sores. He was devoid of any social usefulness, yet God held him to be worthy of eternal life. And where, if not in God, should lie the criterion for the ultimate value of life. We cannot ignore the fact that the supposedly worthless life of the incurable evokes from the healthy the very highest measure of self-sacrifice and even genuine heroism. This devoted service, which is rendered by sound life to sick life, has given rise to real values which are of the highest utility to the community. So I think I began with that because I think it segues into my talk here. So bear with me. I know it's a little heavy, but just bear with me, please. So as we all think about death, we have all been affected by death in some capacity, whether it be in our families, our friendships, our distant relationships, our churches. Christians view death as a time of transition from our earthly lives to life eternal, a life that is free of perils in this world. Death for us is not merely an event that we undergo at the end of life. It is also our ever-present companion in life, a mystery that we are called to embrace more and more. Now, the question is, does the world still believe that death is a mystery and has space for faith? So that's a huge question mark. And a lot of folks would say, probably not. Society has changed, and the fast-developing medical world can do without the recognition of our sovereign Lord. The ethical emphasis is on personal agency and autonomy, on the control of death, and the negative view on pain and suffering. For these reasons, physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia are becoming increasingly more accepted in our society, creating an ethical dilemma that contradicts the Bible. The Christian tradition, from its earliest times, consistently and unequivocally prohibited suicide. The scriptural roots of this prohibition are in the horror of shedding innocent blood attested in the story of Cain and Abel, and throughout Scripture, most notably in the sixth commandment in Exodus chapter 20, verse 13. The Christian tradition has almost universally interpreted the commandment against murder to apply to taking one's own life. The moral status of suicide does not arise as a specific topic in Scripture. The accounts of suicide in the Bible are few, as we know. In these cases, suicide is driven by the feelings of shame, guilt, and fear of dishonor. We see in both 1st and 2nd Samuel, as well as in Chronicles, that Saul was wounded in battle and committed suicide to despair himself mockery by a victorious enemy. In Matthew, Judas hanged himself after betraying Christ. Scripture is silent on the moral status of suicide, but that doesn't account for the approval of it. In contrast, as we read Paul, we view that he viewed his own acceptance of suffering and death as a sharing in or even completion of Christ's sufferings. In fact, Colossians 1 and 2 and 1 Corinthians ardently oppose self-inflicted death out of suffering or despair. The Christian tradition holds that while biological life is a fundamental good, it is not an absolute good. There are values that are weightier than that of this life. Those values call us to risk our own life for the sake of God and others, but not to terminate our life. Christ implicitly indicated this in John 10 when he said, "I am the good shepherd lays his life down for the sheep." And in John 15, "There is no greater love than to give up one's life for a friend." For Christ, life holds an extremely high value as well as the value of God and others. His own death revealed this. So as we look at saints and martyrs throughout the history of the church, they've given up their lives for the sake of faith. They have not chosen death, but they have been ready to accept it for Christ. The concept of the sanctity of life therefore means that human life is precious and to be respected and protected, but it also recognizes that life can be risked for the sake of values and duties that are even more significant. So as we view ethics, physician-assisted suicide, and euthanasia through the lens of the 21st century, it has become a topic that has pervaded our society, as I said earlier. There are difficult medical, ethical, personal, and spiritual decisions that must be considered when death is on the horizon. Are Christians obligated to keep people alive as long as possible by means of medical technology? By asking this question, I'm not advocating to prolong life as long as humanly possible, as it goes against God's will, but rather look at it from the perspective of releasing guilt and fear. The term sanctity of life has been used to convey the enormous value that God ascribes to our lives. We are made in God's own image and likeness. As Psalm chapter 8, verse 5 says, a little lower than angels and crowned with glory and honor. We reflect the image of God in our capacities to love and to rejoice in our own being, as well as our ability to make reasoned and responsible choices. Each and every one of us is infinitely loved and precious to God. And as Christians, we respond to the love of God by cherishing our lives. We know that this earthly life is merely a stepping stone to something far greater than what we are presently experiencing. And praise God for that. Not that I don't love you all, but there's something far greater than what we can even fathom. So as people increasingly believe that their lives are their own, and they can do with them as they please, and a relief should be offered to those who are greatly suffering, an ethical dilemma has been established. Inventions in science and technology and medicine have clearly brought about a new epoch in a person's relation to death. Traditional answers to the requirements of love and mercy concerning medical care for the ill may not lead beyond the conclusion that death must be postponed. The advocates of euthanasia argue cogently that the demands of love and care include insisting them to terminate life when it becomes unbearable. The moral logic of ending human life in any other context requires that any such actions be undertaken as a last resort. There are alternative options in end-of-life care that can bestow on dying persons a measure of control over the dying process, confer value to dying, and open paths to meaning short of a perceived necessity to hasten death by medical means. Such alternative options include exercising the legal rights of persons and their proxies to refuse to artificially extend life through medical treatment, bringing in hospice care, palliative medicine, and providing sufficient sedation to alleviate pain, even if an unintended outcome is a hastened death. It is ethically incumbent to retain these methods as resorts for dying of last recourse, rather than offer physician or medically assisted death as a first resort or as one end-of-life option among many morally equivalent options. These conventional last resorts offer respect, control, relational closure, and quality of dying for the vast majority of dying persons. So as we think about all this, to understand what it means by faithful living and faithful dying is really to understand how the story of the Christian faith makes sense of our life in the world. It is to describe the form and central features of a life that Christians share in common, a life that is shaped in distinctive ways by the Anglican tradition. The Christian faith offers an understanding of a way of life that seeks to deepen our relationship with God and calls us to participate in the purposes of God. It calls us to set forth a pattern of living that shapes our understanding of death and dying as we share that faith throughout our life. Our faith is expressed through understanding life as a gift. Love requires that death not become such a commonplace in the human heart that the loss of even one is not echoed in the depths of the human soul. As we accept our own mortality, maintaining an honest attitude toward death while living in hope is not easy. As Christians, we have to form ourselves to live with the hope and sufferings of daily existence, with the shadow of death, always an ever-present reality. And from there, I'll turn it over to Jennifer Lynes.
Hello. I'm Britney Spears or something. I've never worn one of these. So I am the medical director at Big Bend Hospice. I also take care of 3 home teams at Big Bend Hospice, and I do round in the inpatient units. We have the Dozier House at off Riggins Road, and we now also have an inpatient hospice unit inside TMH that is run by Big Bend Hospice. I'm a Tallahassee native. I went away after high school and was never coming back. And I was away for about 16 years, but have been back about 15 years now. I have 3 daughters and my husband, and we all attend church here. And all 3 of my daughters were baptized, 2 at the old building and 1 at this new building. So we love St. Peter's. And I have been at Big Bend Hospice for 7.5 years. I feel like this is my life's calling to hospice. I really love my job. I love my work. And I love talking about this morbid stuff. So I hope that I can make it interesting for you and help you to understand some of the things that we face that many people don't want to think about or talk about. And I would be glad to be available for questions afterwards, or anytime you see me in church, you can grab me. So the goals for tonight are to kind of demystify and help make some of these things make sense. Medical decisions, we want to reduce fear and anxiety. We want to promote hope and empowerment as you face these challenges with health. We want to educate on decisions that you can make now for the end of your life care, for the care at your end of life. And I want to explain differences between palliative care and hospice care, and to help you to think about these things while you're hopefully in good health or better health than you might be at some other point when it would be more challenging to think about. So we have 3 stages. We're going to talk about a diagnosis of a serious illness, and then palliative care and hospice care, and some other resources and things to be helpful. So starting out with being diagnosed with a serious illness. And so I wanted to distinguish the difference between a chronic illness and a terminal illness. And so a chronic illness is something that someone would have, that they're going to have pretty much for the rest of their life, but it can be managed, it can be treated, it may not be cured. So this might be like hypertension or congestive heart failure or diabetes. And then we call it a terminal illness when we believe that that illness, if it continues on in its natural course, would end your life in 6 months or less. So that's kind of the terminal illness, is 6 months or less. So when you're diagnosed with something, we always want to promote good communication. And this is good communication between you and your loved ones, you and your healthcare designee, you and your medical providers. And if you do get diagnosed with a serious illness, we say this is a good time to start taking care of everything that we talked about last week if you don't already have those things in place. And if you have not appointed a healthcare designee, we would say now is the time to do so. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I just really want to stress how important it is to designate someone to be a healthcare designee and to get that in writing in some way. We talked about last week, there's different terms. There's healthcare power of attorney, there's healthcare surrogate, there's medical proxy. So there's different names, but just this is kind of the chain, or these are things that can happen if you don't have a healthcare designee named. So there's like a legal chain of persons that it is, next of kin, and each state is different. So like if you're a caregiver or a medical decision maker for somebody in another state, it might be different, or if somebody is one for you here. So, it could be the spouse, it could be a parent, it could be a child, and then there's different levels. So you may not want it to be that person. And so that's why it's important for you to pick now. I've seen cases that somebody is still legally married for financial reasons, but they've been separated for 30 years. Well, guess what? That spouse is the one that is that person's person. So when they can no longer make a decision for themselves, they're calling the estranged spouse of 30 years or what have you. So, please, please, please tell somebody and make this legal. And then it can be somebody you may not even know. There's cases in the hospital that if you can't find next of kin, they just get a hospital designated guardian. Then if the patient leaves the hospital, then they have to go through some other process to get a guardian. So we have situations sometimes that the hospital can make decisions for a patient while they're in the hospital, but once they leave, then we're stuck trying to figure out something new. So it just becomes complicated. I think it's very important to talk to the person that you name and let them know. Number one, ask them permission would they want to be your healthcare designee, and then if so, discuss your wishes with them, because that's the most important thing, that they know how to make decisions for what you would want, not what they think you would want or not what they would want. So, and then you can address this and rediscuss this as your life changes based on seasons of life, based on new diagnosis, based on, maybe there's a trauma, maybe there's something else. So you can change your thoughts and your decisions. You can also change your healthcare designee. So just as things change in your life, just consider that, and you're not stuck where you are. And then you can change your mind about your goals as things change, or you learn new information. So it just should be kind of a constant conversation. So I want to talk a little bit about some things you can do at appointments. Like, these are doctor's appointments. So I think it's good to take someone with you to doctor's appointments if you have a serious illness, so that there's another pair of ears, another set of questions, things like that. But it's really, really important to be honest with yourself, your medical providers, and your family, and your healthcare designee. This information that you get can be hard to accept by yourself or by a family member. And so we often hear in my line of work, like a son will come in and say, please don't tell my mom she has cancer. It would just break her. She won't want to fight. She won't, please just don't tell her. And then the mother pulls the doctor aside and says, please don't tell my son I have cancer. He would not be able to handle it, whatever. And so both of these people obviously know what's happening, but they're not even communicating about it. And so you can't really move forward with that because they're each trying to be secretive. So just really be open and honest. And we have had to deal with just different cultures. I had a Hispanic lady who had cancer, and she didn't speak English, or she didn't speak much English, and the daughter would not allow us to tell her she had cancer, because in their culture that's not accepted. The children take care of that burden in their culture. And so it was really hard for us to care for that woman, because we had to not be able to tell her she had cancer, but we had to respect their cultural differences. So that's just another reason I think it's just really important to be honest. And then if you are the healthcare designee or proxy for someone, it is important for you to also be honest and don't be judgmental, and that maybe you wouldn't make the same decisions that this person you're helping to represent would make, but just be there and be present with them and try to help them work through and be with them. And after appointments, I don't have it on here, but after appointments, you want to debrief about kind of what happened and what did you hear and what do you understand that the doctor said, or that kind of thing. These are just some questions you might want to ask a doctor or a nurse practitioner or whoever your primary provider or specialist is, because I think sometimes the patients are scared to ask the hard questions and the doctors are scared to give the hard information. Okay, we're not really trained to talk about some of these things that are very difficult. So I think it's important to ask them, what are all the treatment options? What happens if we don't do any treatment? Because no treatment is an option sometimes, or anytime. And we should be there to support people's wishes. And then what's the prognosis? And maybe what's the prognosis if we do all of these things and what would my quality of life look like if I did all of these treatments, and then what is the prognosis if I didn't do those. So we had this story of, it's actually like a national story. They made wrote a book about it, but there was this 90-something-year-old woman who was diagnosed with cancer, and she sat down with the doctor, and he said, okay, we're going to start chemotherapy, we're going to do some radiation, and she was like, whoa, I don't want that. I'm 90. Like, I want to live I feel pretty good right now. I'd like to live the rest of my life feeling like this, not like what this treatment's going to make me feel like. And so she and her retired son and daughter-in-law and their dog got a mobile home and went all over the country, and she got to enjoy, I think it was like 6 months of just fabulous living with her child, her dog, her daughter-in-law, and like, how special is that? But otherwise, she could have lived those last 6 months in the hospital, in a hospital bed, getting treatments, and so just things to think about. Okay, so palliative care. I'm going to try to explain palliative care and hospice care to you so you can understand. Palliative care is focusing on quality of life and managing a chronic illness. And we're focused on symptom relief and things like just comfort and quality, but at the same time, you can still be pursuing aggressive or curative treatment for whatever illness that you're facing. And so it's similar goals of hospice, but it's still when you want to pursue more aggressive or curative modalities of treatment. You still might try to limit hospitalizations, limit doctor appointments, and manage the symptoms as best you can at home. So Big Bend Hospice has, I kind of think of it now like a sister company. It used to be under Big Bend Hospice, but now it's just kind of in line. We have another parent company created called Seven Oaks Healthcare, and then there's Big Bend Hospice, and there's Transition Supportive Care, and we're going to be adding other lines of treatment and lines of service, but there's information out on the table, also on the resource table. But Transition Supportive Care is an outpatient palliative program. So it's seeking those goals of palliative care, but in the home. And so this is really probably Tallahassee's first outpatient palliative program. We have inpatient palliative care in the hospitals, but this is a program. We started with just a social worker and something called a navigator that would help with like gaining resources and help people like navigate the healthcare system and things. But we have added nurse practitioners that do home visits, and have found this is really helpful. So this is for people who, again, are struggling with a chronic or serious illness and are wanting to focus on comfort and quality of life, but staying at home as much as possible. These nurse practitioners, so Big Bend Hospice covers 8 counties. These nurse practitioners for Transition Supportive Care are not quite in all 8 counties. I think we're in 5. So it is a little limited, and they're not allowed to go into nursing homes yet, but they can go into assisted living, and they cannot prescribe narcotics. So this, again, is just more for symptom management and chronic care management.
If you're under palliative care, do you have to have a diagnosis of terminal illness within 6 months, or is it beyond the 6 months?
Okay, that's a good question. So no, not 6 months. So hospice is the cutoff of 6 months. So the question was, in palliative care, do you have to have a prognosis of less than 6 months? And so the answer is no. Palliative care is more just chronic illness, and you may have some longer amount of time to live. It could even be years, but you're just trying to shift your focus. Okay. And so that's, now if hospice is that cutoff of 6 months or less, I would say there are people that are choosing palliative care that could go into hospice but don't want hospice yet. And so when you get to hospice, we can kind of talk about that in a minute or a little bit later, but you have to kind of want hospice and be shifting the goals a little bit at that point. Okay. So there's another program that we have called the Caregiver Renewal Institute, and this has been maybe a year and a half or so that we've had this. And this I'm mentioning just because some people may not be the patient that has the chronic illness, but they're the caregiver, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to be a caregiver, especially a full-time caregiver of somebody who may not even be able to leave their home. So it's really important to care for the caregiver and do self-care. And so these are some of the things that the Caregiver Renewal Institute does. It's really more of a resource place for caregivers. There's a website, we'll have it on your sheet and on the resource table outside. But there's online resources either that you can check out and come get in person, like books, or you can just get online resources. They have classes online and in person at Big Bend Hospice to teach how to be caregivers or to learn about specific illnesses. One that's a big one is dementia, and like learning about the progression of dementia and what to expect and how to be a caregiver for a patient with dementia. So I think it's just really helpful. They also have like online yoga classes to try to help with meditation and relaxation. So it's just a really good place to try to get some ways to support the caregiver. I just wanted to touch on, yes, sir?
So on the handout, I see stage 2, which is palliative, and then I see stage 3, which was hospice. I don't see a stage 1.
That was just the diagnosis of the illness.
Just the diagnosis.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And these are kind of our own designations just to like break up the talk into stages. It's not necessarily like that.
Wouldn't no caregiver typically come before palliative? Wouldn't you typically
Sometimes.
go through a caregiver before you went into palliative?
Well, caregiver can even just be your spouse.
Right.
Okay, so like if my mom has dementia and my dad is her caregiver, so those are the caregivers we're talking about. But you might have that before you get to that point, and you may not. And sometimes people just slowly become a caregiver and didn't realize and be like, I didn't sign up for this, Okay, so I wanted to just touch on some other like facilities like that people go to, long-term care facilities, this kind of thing, because I think not everyone understands what's out there and how different places can help or maybe can't help, and how they can be restrictive based on finances or other things. And I didn't know a lot of this until I became into this position or this job at hospice and learned. But so there's independent living, which most of us do at home, right? Independent living. There is something also called group homes, which is more for like developmentally delayed people or like genetic disorders and things like that. And that's usually younger people, but those are group homes that help care for people also, dependent adults, and sometimes children. But then you get to assisted living. So assisted living facilities, there are different levels of assisted living. So you have to be really careful if you go and tour. I mean, I think we probably have 20 in Tallahassee. And you have to, they have different licensures. So some can give you medicine, some can't give you medicine, some can't, do certain personal care things. So you have to really look and see what their license is and what they're able to do. Some of them require a person to have a certain level of mobility to live there. So like being able to transfer from a bed to a wheelchair or up to a recliner, or maybe a certain level of cognition. Then they do have a lot of these assisted living facilities, ALF is what we call them, have memory care like lockdown units and stuff for the patients with more advanced dementia. So that's another level even within the ALF. But in general, they can help with like personal care, providing meals. They have dining halls. So, you have these people who are going to prepare the food and you just show up and you're going to eat, Sometimes they can bring the medicines to you. And then there's different levels within there. Like you might be able to sign up for them to bring you the meds, or that I'm going to go in every week and prepare the meds and leave them out for them. So it's just sort of what are the needs. Now, payments for assisted living facility are cash money or long-term care insurance. So I'm going to give a little plug for long-term care insurance. Please get long-term care insurance before you don't qualify for it, because we don't realize that there's this kind of gap of the majority of human beings that do not have enough money to pay an assisted living facility or to pay for a long-term care. And I'm going to talk about long-term care in a minute, but assisted livings are anywhere from like $2,500 to $7,000 a month. So that's just throwing that out there. Now we get to skilled nursing facilities, and that's what we call a SNF or an SNF. This is around-the-clock nursing care. And so these have nurses that are staffed there 24 hours. And so they provide a higher level of care. Some of these people are bedbound. They're never going to get out of bed, the patients. Some of them could get out of bed. And so just depending, again, on their abilities. At these skilled nursing facilities, they can provide what's called skilled therapy. So that's like wound care, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy. But you only have a certain number of days on your Medicare that will pay for that. And after that, you either have to leave, or you have to start paying cash money, or you have to pay, or you have to have Medicaid. So Medicaid is for the people who don't have as much money to have Medicaid, or don't have, so Medicaid is just for the lower income people. If you have too many assets, you can't qualify for Medicaid, but you may not have enough assets to pay cash money for long-term care. So these facilities are $10,000 to $12,000 a month. And again, if you're somebody who's bedbound, you're not going to qualify for the assisted living facility, so you're going to have, your only option is the nursing home. Okay, so these are the nursing homes. Or to pay somebody to come in your home around the clock, or rotate. I've got 7 kids. They each take a week at a time and rotate through and take care of Granny or whatever. So there's different ways to be creative about it, but I just am trying to get you to think, there's this gap of people who cannot afford to pay around-the-clock caregivers or pay for a nursing home. And so that's kind of where the long-term care insurance can come in and help. But it is also limited. It's limited in amount or duration. So just real upper things to think about there. Let's leave that on a good note. Okay, so I talked about long-term care insurance. Paid caregivers, one thing I'll say real quick, I know I'm just about out of time, is you can go to an agency that is insured and has certain training and requirements for their CNAs or aides to come and provide care in your home for your loved one. Those usually you're going to pay $18 to $25 an hour probably for that person. They can come and hand you the medicine for you to put in your own mouth or your loved one, but they cannot put the medicine in your mouth. My patients, by the time that they're needing more of this, a lot of times they are not able to put the medicine in their own mouth. And so you need to either have someone who can put it in their mouth or the family member or what have you. And so sometimes those agencies aren't helpful in that sense, but they can do other things like bathing or helping to feed somebody or things like that. Sometimes you can get paid caregivers word of mouth, through a friend or a family member or a church member that they knew that this lady helped them. And so those people, you can pay them, but you won't know that they're background checked or they won't be agency, certified, but they can do whatever you tell them to do and you're paying them to do. And you might be able to pay them a little bit less per hour than the agency. We provided this resource here, Advantage Aging Solutions, that helps kind of navigate a little bit of this. I'm not really familiar with this website and this resource, but it has been talked about before and we did put it in the resource list. So sometimes it's just helpful to know kind of what other options are out there. So I'm going to do a little tangent just real quick. I wanted to mention elder and dependent abuse. This is way more common than any of us realize. 1 in 10 Americans age 60 plus will experience some sort of abuse. And a lot of this comes from caregiver burnout or fatigue, and so that's why I was trying to give you some of the other resources earlier about helping the caregiver, okay? And we gave the Florida Abuse Hotline, which is technically the Child Abuse Hotline, but that's where all abuse is reported, and so that's also in your list of resources, and we have that there. And then the different types of abuse, so there's physical, sexual, emotional, confinement, neglect, willful deprivation, and financial exploitation are different types of abuse that we see in elders or dependent adults. Okay, so we're coming back to this question of hospice versus palliative care. And so it was kind of hit on earlier, but hospice is palliative care in what we think is the last 6 months of life. Okay, so it's similar. But at this point, we are choosing to shift our goals from being aggressive curative treatments to being more comfort and quality of life driven. We're limiting procedures, we're limiting medications, just really trying to focus on helping the patient and the family. When does someone make the shift from palliative care to hospice? And that's really up to each person or family member, is the decision maker. And there are plenty of people who qualify for hospice but don't want to accept it because they just think that they're giving up, or that it's a death sentence, or they're going to die in some days. And so we have a lot of people who die without hospice because they just don't want to do that, or they don't realize it's as close. So I'm going to go forward just a minute because I thought we should do this different. I'm going to go to the myths of hospice, and then I'm going to go back and talk about what hospice really is. Yes.
Okay, if you're in your mid-90s, say, and you don't necessarily have a chronic illness, you're just old, and that just turning 70, 95 is old. What about if it's failure to thrive?
Okay.
Can
Yes. So this is very tricky, and if you would like, I would love for you to go become a hospice lobbyist. We used to be able to say, so to come into hospice service, we have to have a terminal diagnosis. And Medicare tells us what's allowed and what's not allowed. So failure to thrive is no longer allowed.
No, under Medicare?
Under Medicare. It used to be allowed, and now it can't. So I have to get really creative sometimes and make up some kind of terminal diagnosis that I think Medicare will accept. So, but yes, that would be a great scenario. And so sometimes, yeah, failure to thrive is just basically like you're not eating anymore, you're losing weight, you're debilitated, you're old. Like sometimes it's just you're old. Like, and I can put on a death certificate you died of natural causes because of old age. But Medicare won't pay for you to be on hospice because you're old. Like, it's just really ridiculous. So, all right. So these are the myths of hospice that I wanted to touch on, and then, like I said, we'll go back and talk about what hospice really is. So and I'm saying what the myth is. So hospice is a place. Medicine and morphine kill patients. Hospice is for patients that just have days to hours to live. So hospice is not a place. It is a service. It's a Medicare benefit that you choose, and there are other insurances that cover hospice care. A lot of people feel like they do not want to take morphine because as soon as I prescribe morphine and they take it, they're going to die. And I can just tell you that's not true. I have patients at home on 600 milligrams of morphine a day, and they're still living for months. So it's not. I think sometimes it seems that that's a reality because somebody takes their medicine and then they die in a few hours. Well, that looks like that. But that person was dying anyway, and we're giving them medicines that's helping their comfort. And we do not give morphine to every patient. We don't give even sometimes pain medicine to every patient. It's based on what their symptoms are and what their goals are. So, and hospice can help patients for months, even sometimes years. I have a patient right now that has been on hospice for 6 years.
Do you know if there's any difference in what straight Medicare will cover versus Medicare Advantage plans, or have you observed any difference?
So I don't know that difference, and you would not know that difference as a hospice patient. So when you choose hospice, your Medicare kind of shifts to hospice and pays hospice, and then hospice pays for everything essentially. I mean, there's some nuances, but we take care of every patient no matter what their insurance, and so I don't think that you would notice any difference, and I don't know that we notice any difference necessarily on that.
I have a question. You said that hospice you have to be within 6 months of dying, and then you reassess them every 6 months, and so it turns into 6 years?
Right, kind of. So we have to be able to say that we believe that the hospice doctor believes that you're going to die in 6 months or less based on the disease you have and its natural course. A lot of times what happens is people come onto hospice and we're there supporting the patient, supporting the family. We're removing medicines that we don't think are essential, and people do better. Sometimes people do so much better we discharge them from hospice. But then they do have rules, Medicare has rules of how often we have to recertify each patient. And so it's 3 months, and then 3 months, and then 2 months for the rest of until they die. And so at that point, you're having a hospice doctor or nurse practitioner see the patient every 2 months, in addition to their hospice team that sees them weekly or more often sometimes. And we're really looking for ways that people are declining. They're getting skin breakdown, their mobility is lessening, they're having falls, they're losing weight, they're eating less, they're sleeping more. Like, there's all these little things we're looking for. And if those things are occurring, then we believe you still could die in 6 months, then we recertify you. And I can tell you, I don't know how that lady has lived for 6 years. She has wonderful care from her daughter and in her home, and she has hospice support. And I believe if we discharge her from hospice, she would probably pass, because we're helping the caregiver as well. So it is a little tricky. And I have patients that come to the hospice unit and die in 20 minutes. So it's kind of a balance, but it's not just for days to live. And so we're trying to really get people to choose hospice or to be admitted to hospice earlier on so that you can benefit and your family can benefit. Most people will say, I wish I had called hospice sooner, or I wish I had accepted hospice sooner. I never heard somebody say, we should have not called hospice. So more myths. This is the last one of myths. Hospice requires you to stop taking all routine medications, and that is not true. We look at every medicine you're on, and we're seeing, does this help your comfort or quality of life? I don't think a 90-year-old needs to be on an anti-cholesterol medicine anymore. So please stop taking your Lipitor. But your thyroid medicine, I want you to keep taking. Your depression medicine, I want you to keep taking. If you have a high heart rate, I want you to take the medicine to help keep your heart rate controlled, because that may make you feel short of breath or anxious. So we think through all of those decisions, okay? Another myth is hospice requires you to sign a DNR. We do not require you to sign a DNR, and I'm going to talk all about DNRs later, so we're not going to go into that right now, but we don't require that. Hospice does not allow any treatments or procedures, and that's not true. We do a case-by-case basis. If somebody has severe anemia that's making them very short of breath, then we will allow a blood transfusion. I had a patient that was in with a blood cancer, and she had been getting transfusions, and she was ready to stop the transfusion, but she said, I just want to make it to my something birthday. I think it was her 85th birthday. And so we said, okay, we'll look at this. She was getting short of breath, getting weaker. We checked her hemoglobin. It was 3.4. Normal is like 12. And so we said, we'll get you this blood transfusion. I thought it would get her to her birthday, which was in 2 weeks. She lived like 4 more months. And she did great, and that was it. And she was ready, and she was okay. We helped her meet that. We'll sometimes remove fluid from the belly or the lungs to help people breathe better. We do antibiotics, sometimes not usually IV antibiotics, but we do a lot of oral antibiotics by mouth. We do treatments. We do think, again, it's going back to the comfort and the quality of life and helping people to feel better. And then the myth of hospice performs physician-assisted suicide. At least in Florida, we do not, and I'm thankful for that. So that is going back to Ryan's devotional there, so thank you for that. I will say, I have heard many, many, many times by many family members that we treat animals better than we treat our loved one when they're having to see their loved one laying there kind of in a coma, for sometimes weeks. It's hard. It is hard, but I've had some discussions with different people, and we don't understand. I don't understand why God would let somebody live like that. We know they're going to die. Why would He let them live in a coma for 3 weeks? And their family seeing that suffering, and it's not suffering in the sense that they're not in pain, but just it's hard to watch somebody. They're not eating. They're not awake. They're not talking to you. But I think there's something that we don't know what's happening. We don't know what's in that subconscious or in this other realm. We see certain things over and over with patients, no matter their age, their disease, their creed, whatever. Common things you see towards the end of life is people reaching and picking, so what is out there, right? Or talking to something that's out there, or talking to deceased relatives. That's so common. So there's something happening that we don't know. And so who am I to say I'm going to end your life now instead of tomorrow or the next day or the next day? I don't know what's happening there in that subconscious. So I don't think that's right. And I have this sweet memory of this lady who came to the hospice house. She was over 100 years old. She had 2 daughters who were obviously elderly come with her. She was at an assisted living facility. We brought her to the hospice house to help because she was having some agitation and pain. And those daughters were just at such peace. They said, my parents were missionaries in the jungles of Brazil, and we were raised in the jungles of Brazil. And my mom is very faithful, and when she was at the assisted living before she came, they said she was saying, look how beautiful, it's just so beautiful, it's so beautiful. And so she was seeing something out there, and it gave her daughters peace to know she saw that. And she came to the hospice house, she never woke up or spoke again, but like she saw something that we're all gonna see one day. All right, so I'm gonna go back to where I skipped. So to talk about what hospice is. So hospice is, again, it's a service, it's not a place. We have 410 patients across 8 counties in the Big Bend right now. And then we have the 2 inpatient units. Most of our patients are in their own homes or in nursing homes or assisted living facilities. We take an interdisciplinary team approach. And I wish that this type of care could be taken to every realm of medicine because it's so helpful. But we have doctors and nurse practitioners, skilled nurses, hospice aides, social workers, spiritual care counselors is what they're called now, used to be called chaplains, music therapists, volunteers, veteran support, and other services. And so each patient gets their own like customized plan of care. And we change that plan of care daily if need be, or weekly or monthly based on how the patient's condition is and changing. We're assessing what does the patient need and what does the family need. So we are there to support both. We also offer respite care. So for people who do have a caregiver and the caregiver is getting tired or burned out, we can offer respite care. And we do this in our hospice house. We also have contracts with certain nursing homes or the hospitals like in Madison and in Perry, I think in Apalachicola now. And so the patient can go and stay at those places and have the care given to them by those staff for 5 days. And this is free. It's in the hospice benefit. So so the caregivers can then sleep, go out to dinner, or go to Hawaii, or whatever they want to do in those 5 days. And sometimes they can come, like if sometimes they don't come back. That is, yes, that does happen. Or they might just say, I can't take them home anymore. And so then we have to bring in our social workers and figure out how we're going to navigate this, right? So sometimes people they'll have the respite that's free to the family for the 5 days, and then they can pay some extra days if need be, like if they had a special vacation. Like I had one lady that was going scuba diving in Indonesia. And she's like, so I need, I'm going to take the 5 days and I'm going to pay for like, I don't know, it was like 10 or 15 more days, something. So, but we're there to try to help support them. So we help with resources, so facility placement, helping plug in other resources like Meals on Wheels, Medicaid. Certain people with Medicaid can have paid caregivers come into their home that Medicaid pays for, so we help set that up. We have had children on hospice, and we help get services for them. We can help getting supplements like Ensure and Boost and things like that for them. Just teaching and support. So it's a lot of resources to help the families. So other services that I think most people don't know about, and I think this is true to most hospices, but I'm going to speak specifically about things that Big Bend Hospice does. So bereavement, that is like grief support for the families of patients that have been in hospice for 13 months following the loved one's death for free grief counseling. There's also, I'm not certain if this is still true, but before COVID, we even had free grief support, like one-on-one counseling for patients or for people in the community that did not have patients in hospice for only like 4 sessions. So it's like a limited number, but it's still a free service to the community. I think that's pretty awesome. We have grief support groups that are free. So this is not the one-on-one counseling, but this is like a support group. And so they do this for children, teens, and adults. So a couple weeks ago, they had a teen night. I actually went and participated. They had like Ask a Doctor night. And then last night was children's night. So we were there. And then they do things like, the bereavement does like a Mother's Day luncheon, because these kind of holidays are hard for loved ones, people experiencing the loss of a loved one. So Mother's Day, Father's Day, Thanksgiving, winter holiday, they do different like dinners and meals for people. But again, all of that's free. They have these day camps for teens and kids. So it's called Woe Be Gone. And so there's teen Woe Be Gone and then kids Woe Be Gone. And it's like a day camp, and the kids get bussed in, and there's like games and activities, and then grief counselors are there and things like that. So that's really cool. The other thing that we do when there's some kind of tragedy in the community, so like there was a teacher that was killed, or a teacher died, or some kind of bad event at a school, our Big Bend Hospice social workers and grief counselors will go to that school and provide counseling to the faculty, to the students, whatever, for free. So these are all things that we're doing beyond just taking care of patients day to day. We have a program called Pet Peace of Mind. So one thing that Beth mentioned last week is like figuring out what's going to happen with your pet if you die, right? So this is a program that hospice has created to help patients who are really concerned about their pet for them to have peace of mind that we will make sure their pet is cared for. And so sometimes we're able to place that pet prior to the death, and sometimes it may be after the death, but it does help that patient. We have a lot of veterans support services. We do valor ceremonies for the veterans. We have extra volunteers and different services to help our vets. And then the community outreach stuff that I was kind of mentioning. All right, so we'll go back through the myths. Okay, so I want to talk about setting some goals and like just, or not even setting goals, but like thinking about goals and like how you would want to be treated, how you would, what things would you maybe want or not want. And so just kind of going through thinking about what does it mean to you to have a meaningful life at the end of life. And so what are some things you maybe have wanted to accomplish, or maybe what is something you've wanted to do, and just thinking about that. So number one, you can live your life how you want to live it now, but just thinking about what that's going to look like back at the end and what goals you might still want. So some people have wanted, we'll talk about that in a second. So then going back and thinking about Father Petty's discussion on the first week we had, and him talking about, we are living creatures, and that life is a gift to us from God. And so what does that mean, and how do we use that? Is the purpose of life to be productive and work, or do you want to do something different? And what is a legacy that you want to leave? So goals, to me, like helping families or patients to meet goals to help kind of answer some of those questions when they're near the end. Somebody may want to make it to a birth of a child or a grandchild, or the wedding of somebody, or a graduation of someone. So those are kind of tangible things that they may want to get to. Some may want to be able to do a hobby. So we had a couple of people who just wanted to go fishing again. And so like one person got this boat that they could like put a motorized scooter onto and take the guy fishing, maybe one last time. And artwork, like trying to do some art therapy, or letting people paint or draw or write. Sometimes they want to go to the beach. So we did have, this is pretty sad, we had a very small child, it was last summer I think, who had a genetic disorder and was supposed to only live for a couple of weeks, and lived to be 3 years old, and he was like the second oldest living child with that disorder, like in the country or something. But he was granted a Make-A-Wish. We helped, like our social workers helped the family to fill out the Make-A-Wish thing, and he wanted to go to the beach. He did not make it to the beach, but after he passed, one of our spiritual counselors took their family to her beach house and let them stay for a weekend in his honor. And so these are the kind of things that are just really special, and really are meaningful. Other goals at the end may just be comfort. We have a lot of people who have been in severe pain from different kinds of cancers, and really just for them to be not in pain is just a huge gift. And I will say, a lot of times when people have been in pain for so long and then they finally get pain relief, they want to sleep. And so that's another reason that sometimes people think, oh, you gave them medicine and put them to sleep. No, they're like finally comfortable, right? Other goals are peace and dignity. Some goals, maybe they want to be surrounded by family or friends. Some people really want independence. So this can be challenging when people's physical health is declining, but they want to continue to be independent. And so we're trying to work with them in allowing them to be independent as long as they can safely, and trying to put in different maybe assistive devices or a ramp at their home, or the bars in their bathrooms, those kind of things. But just allowing them to do as much as they're able is sometimes a goal for people. Okay, so I want to talk about quality versus quantity of life. This is kind of going back to that story I shared of the older lady who had cancer and told the doctor, I don't want treatment. You know, he didn't offer her that no treatment was an option, but she chose that because she wanted quality, right? Quality of life. It didn't matter if she got a couple extra months or days or something. So I think there's a lot of myths about what medical care can actually do. We have extreme interventions that we can do to, you know, artificially keep people alive for long periods of time. And so we'll talk about some of those in a little bit. And I try to think of things like, and I say this to students when I talk to students, like there are a ton of things that we can do to a patient, but it's not always doing something for that patient. And so it's really like what is best for them. And I think, again, going back to that, doctors are not really trained well in talking about de-escalating care or not doing everything possible or that kind of thing. And so I think we just really need to start learning about saying it's okay to not do something. And I think that sometimes the doctors need to not offer every possible thing that could be done, right?
Jennifer,
Yes.
is that because they're worried about if they withhold something or can not do something, being sued?
I'm sure that does probably play part, but I'm going to say in our training, we're not trained even how to have these discussions, right? So I worked in the ER for years, small town, very small town ER, but you know, I was comfortable saying to a family member, like, I don't think we really need to intubate them right now. I don't think that's going to help their quality of life, you know. But I think a lot of us went into medicine to help people, and by helping to us, that means fixing, making them better. And now I view helping people as giving them comfort and dignity and peace, you know, and so it's kind of that shift. And I have a nurse practitioner said this really well today, actually. She said, I'm helping you to feel better, but I'm not caring what is making you feel bad. Like, I'm not trying to fix what's making you feel bad, I'm just trying to make you feel better. And that's kind of where we get to, but I think we do have to balance that malpractice fear with, you know, and just saying these are kind of some options, but we don't have to do everything. So I have this thing I also think about, like living versus being alive. So living, I'm out there doing what I want to do. I'm doing hobbies. I'm, you know, mountain biking, whatever it is, or even if it's just, you know, scrapbooking or sitting reading a book, like, or needlepoint or something. I'm living, I'm doing something. But being alive is, I've got a heartbeat and I'm breathing. And that could be on a machine or what have you, but it's not really living, right? You had a question?
Yeah, so since it's a Medicare benefit, does Medicare ever dictate to you treatment protocol?
No, but they dictate to me what I have to pay for. So Medicare pays hospice per patient per day. It's a per diem rate. And I have to then take care of everything I'm going to for each patient with that amount of dollars. So when I'm reviewing, you know, what medicine or what, you know, we have to take that into consideration because we need to be fiscally, you know, smart and so that we can be sustainable, right? So I can't do everything for every patient. So some patients are only on comfort meds and we're spending very few dollars on them. So we're stealing their dollars to pay for this other guy's blood transfusion. You know what I mean? Like, so, and you're paid more, like this is getting in the weeds, but like you're paid more the first like 60 days of hospice. And then it kind of goes down because most of the work is on that front end and getting everything settled. And then they kind of can coast for a little bit sometimes. And then it's less.
Can a patient elect to have treatment protocols that are not covered by Medicare? And does that need to be covered in writing before they get into hospice?
There is something similar to that, yes. So there's certain medicines, like we have a formulary that we try to stick to. So if they want a different medicine, they can pay for it out of pocket, and we can tell you about that, and they can elect to have that in writing. They can also choose to sign out of hospice and go do their other things and come back later. So it's not like once you're in, you're in. You know, you can come in and go as you want to. There's something also called concurrent care. Some hospices do this a lot more than ours, just based on their financial abilities, but sometimes the VA, so if I have certain patients that have full VA benefits, the VA may still pay for them to get chemotherapy and stay on hospice, or to get other, dialysis was one that I had Blue Cross Blue Shield approved to pay for the lady's dialysis, and she could still have hospice, and normally you wouldn't do that. So there's certain times, and kids, pediatric patients can always have concurrent care, because that's a really tough one. So they can still get their care and hospice. So it gets a little detailed, but.
When a patient goes to hospice, is their primary care, their previous primary care physician out of the picture when they go to hospice?
Okay, that's a good question. So there's two things that happen. The patient is given the choice of who they want to be their hospice attending, okay? And so you can say Dr. Smith. And then hospice goes to Dr. Smith and says, do you want to be their attending physician? And he can say yes or no. So if the patient picks this person and that doctor says yes, then they can stay on, and that just means that they're really interactive in their care. And really what that means is most of the time, and I try to tell people, one of the biggest benefits to me of hospice is you do not have to go to a doctor appointment. If you have the energy to get up and go to the doctor appointment, I want you to go to the beach. I want you to go fishing. I want you to do the things you want to do, not go to a doctor's office and be exposed to more germs, right? So we can coordinate your care. Now we can use your primary doctor if they're willing. And what that means is like you call us and say, I'm having symptoms of a cold and I think I need antibiotics. So we can call Dr. Smith and say, will you give, Sally Joe some antibiotics? And then he can say yes or no. Sometimes the doctors will just say, we want to be kept notified of how they're doing and what's going on, but I want hospice to manage their medicines. So it's kind of a balance, and we try. And there's some doctors that really want to be very involved, and there's some that don't. And some will say, I'll manage some things, but you're going to manage the pain medicine because we know the pain medicine the best. So it gets to be a blend, but you don't have to go to the doctor. And if you do go to the doctor, hospice is going to have to pay for that doctor visit. So again, not to say we don't want you to go to the doctor, because I know a lot of people have good relationships with their doctor, but our nurse will go in the home and she's kind of our eyes and ears, or he, and then they communicate with us and we take care of people that way, okay? And you can still talk to your specialist too, is the other thing. So going back to the quality versus quantity, another thing thinking about, kind of going back to Father Michael's thing, is a lot of people just want to, prolong life as long as possible and avoid even thinking about it, denying that death's coming, whatever. So, but again, it's your choice and we want you to come to do that. So is my time up now? Okay. So I think we might need, we have a lot of information, so I don't know if we want to table-to-table discussions.
We're gonna keep going a bit longer. If you have to step out, we totally understand. You're not being rude, but we do want to make sure we get this information out. So we might just be a couple minutes over time. If you have to get kids, we totally understand. So, thank you guys.
So I wanted just to go over a couple of different extreme medical things, procedures and stuff that you can think about, and different ways to think about those. So mechanical breathing, this is you're on the ventilator, the tube is down your throat breathing for you. If that happens long enough, they have to do a surgery and put a tracheostomy on you, which is the breathing tube now goes here instead of down your throat. So this is one thing to think about. CPR, that's where they're doing the chest compressions on you, your heart stopped beating and they're trying to make your heart start beating again. Artificial nutrition and hydration. This is, they're gonna either just IV fluids, sometimes they have a special IV line that they can give proteins and things through that line, and then there's feeding tubes. I wanna say a little thing about feeding tubes. These were created for short-term use, somebody in a car accident or somebody something temporary that they needed to, get over that hump, they couldn't eat well, and then have it removed. A lot of times though, when they're placed, they never come out. This happens a lot in dementia patients, stroke patients, those are kind of the most common. And so I think it's really, really important to think about it. It's a lot of times they'll say, well, your loved one's having difficulty swallowing, they're gonna aspirate. And so they think if you put this feeding tube in, you won't aspirate. There still is aspiration risk with a feeding tube, okay? And so again, I don't think everybody's always getting all the information. I had a patient who had a feeding tube for 12 years, and she was in a vegetative state. So it's not like me. There are people that have feeding tubes and can still walk around and talk and have a life, but this one was in a vegetative state in a nursing home for 12 years. And then the nursing home would not turn it off when the son asked them to, because they're not allowed to, because that's withholding feeding. Now, every single person will quit eating when they're dying. I don't care what disease you have. I don't care whatever. That is a common sign that you're getting ready to die, is you quit eating. It is a natural process. But they would not allow this woman. That we had to bring her to the hospice house to stop her tube feedings so that she could die in peace. And the son said, I would have never put this tube in her if I had known this. And so it's just things to think about, because it's harder once you make the choice to do something, okay? There's intensive care and all the things we can do at the intensive care unit. Then there's pain relief medications, chemotherapy, radiation therapy, and different surgeries. So do not resuscitate. I do want to spend a little bit of time on this. You may have heard this term. You may not have heard this term, but we call it do not resuscitate. In the state of California, it is called allow a natural death. I think allow a natural death is a lot better name for this, because when people hear do not, they think we're not doing something, we're withholding something, we're not giving you something you need. So it's not that I'm not going to treat you. It's not that it's just that if you're sitting here at church and your heart stops beating or you quit breathing, we're not going to come and rush and do heroic measures and pound on your chest and shock you and put the tube down your throat to breathe for you and all that. So it's just, again, it's allowing a natural death. And so I want you guys just to think about that. And again, going back to hospice, you do not have to have a do not resuscitate signed for hospice. We like you to, because we feel like that's more in line with comfort goals, but we're not going to, mandate that. So, and then it just kind of goes back to that thing of, again, living versus being alive. And I think it's often it's more difficult to make the decision to withdraw care once something has been started. So if you said, I want to be, it's full code, if you're not, do not resuscitate. So they pound on your chest, they put the tube down you get a heartbeat back, but now you're kind of brain dead. So now the family has to decide to withdraw those things. And to me, that's a harder decision than just saying, don't start that, let them die peacefully, right? I think yes?
Are there degrees there? If I keel over in church, give it a shot, try to get me back. But if I've got 10 more years going and I'm in bed anyway and my heart stops, then fine, just let me go. So are there degrees of this?
It's hard. Yeah, there's not degrees. It's hard to know. And so my dad had a cardiac arrest while he was driving, and I happened to be out in my front yard just across the street, and my mom was there and could yell to me to come. I was able to come. I started resuscitation on Thomasville Road for him. Undercover cop stopped, nurse off her shift stopped, and we got him back. And that's almost 12 years ago. And he's living and he's normal. And he he made the cookies tonight, but he didn't come. And I'm really glad that happened that way. The only reason that I even did CPR on him is because I witnessed that arrest. Like it was that moment. If you're in church and that happens, we probably would do that because we don't know if you're a DNR or not. If you don't know, like medical professionals, you just do it. You do what you're supposed to do. But if I came into my dad and he's laying in the recliner dead, I'm not going to do CPR on him now because I don't know if he's been gone for 5 minutes or 20 minutes or an hour, right? And so at that point, he's had brain damage. But at the moment that he had this while he was driving, there was a chance. And I didn't think through all of that in my mind in that 30 seconds, but it's a lot. And so I just think for our patients who are on hospice at home, I want their families to know, or if they come into the hospice house, this is where it gets really hard. If they come in the hospice house, I don't want to be doing CPR on you. I don't have a crash cart there. I don't have a way to resuscitate you at the hospice house. I'd have to call 911. That's disruptive to other patients and families, which is not our goal. And so that's a little bit of a challenge. But in general, I just think that most people should be a do not resuscitate. I just think that in general. But yes.
I assume we have an AED here at church. Where is it?
We do. There's one outside the usher closet. And there's one down here somewhere. Right here.
Right there, I see it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So you're welcome.
For those who've been trained to use them, you need to know where they are.
Yes, you do. And you need to hope that they're not expired. So, expired. Okay, so his question was, can you make a DNR that's like specifies certain situations? And the answer to that basically is no, but you can have that conversation with your healthcare designee and tell them, you know, once I hit 85, I want to be a do not resuscitate, or if I'm diagnosed with a terminal illness, I want to be, or, you know, and as long as you're in your right mind, you can change that as you go. But pretty much it's kind of a yes or no, because we can't think of all those things. You know, and sometimes it'll say, they're saying, I work in Georgia also, and like 2 physicians can sign it in Georgia. Like just 2 physicians can deem that this person does not have a meaningful recovery or chance of a meaningful recovery. But there are times that you can say, like, if I am deemed terminal by 2 doctors, or, you know, so, I mean, it gets a little crazy, but I just think, like, basically, you're right. Like, I think there's sort of like an age and there's other illnesses on top, you know, but. Okay, I just wanted to say a couple of things about this death certificates. We do a lot of death certificates, but as I've gone through these years knowing more and more, there are certain things that we can put on the death certificate, or if we leave off the death certificate, it can impact the loved one's benefits. So this is especially true in the VA patients, veteran patients, and sometimes other, like if you have an accidental death policy or if you have different insurance things. So if you really care about that, please find that out ahead of time, what needs to be on there, and please tell your doctor that's going to sign the death certificate. Just like, and then this goes back to your question. If your doctor agrees to be the hospice attending, then they usually will sign the death certificate. Sometimes though, I'll get a call, Dr. So-and-so will not sign the death certificate, will you do it? And I always say, yes, I'm gonna do it if they were our patient, But Dr. So-and-so may have known that you needed to have exposure to Agent Orange on your death certificate, and I didn't know that. And then I can amend the death certificate because the family calls and they're ticked off at me. I'm sorry. And so, but there's a process to amend it, and you have to then, like, I normally just do it electronically and it goes right to vital statistics. Well, now I've got to do it in handwriting, and then I've got to have a notary, and then so like, please make it easy for, again, these are part of those planning things. So let the doctor that you know is going to be the one to fill out the death certificate know what needs to be on there before they do it. And then COVID-19, I don't know if this is, I don't even think this is still the case, but there were certain times I was putting COVID-19 on anybody as a contributory factor if they had it within like the last 6 months for a long time, because the government would help pay for the funeral, and I thought that was a benefit to the families, you know. Well, then one family gets ticked off because I put it on there. They did not want COVID-19 on their death certificate, and I'm like, who cares? Like who cares? But anyway, so if you have something particular you want, please let somebody know so they don't have to redo it later. Okay, you had a question. Sorry.
Yes. The Department of Health in the state of Florida will issue 2 types of death certificates. One has the cause of death on it, and one does not. The one does not, you can take it to the bank and get transactions done, but that people don't necessarily need to know what the cause of death is. So you can order 2 types of death certificates, and the other one, of course, has the cause of death, and if you need that for insurance companies to make sure it's not a suicide or there's a reason that you post accident policies and that kind of thing, seeing if it's an accident. But there are 2 types of death certificates.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. I didn't know that. These last couple slides are on your outline. I'm not going to go over those. They're just kind of some of those questions again, like thinking about what you would want or what you wouldn't want. And I'm sorry that we ran over. I know we started a little bit late and then we fit in the devotional. I think this is really important information. And if you have questions for me, I'm glad to stay up here. And thank you.